Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the public hearing for the Planning and Zoning Commission for Tuesday, January 24th, 2023. Our first item is Pledge of Allegiance. If all could rise and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. If anyone has a cell phone, if they could turn it to vibrate or shut it off, we would appreciate that. Our order of business tonight will be first to hear from our applicant, then we'll hear from town staff, then we'll hear from members of the public, first in favor, and then those against or having questions or concerns, and then we will hear from commissioners. When speaking at the microphone works best 3 to 6 inches away. If you're too close, it's going to have a lot of echo. If you're too far away, our sound system and our people at home don't hear it as well. So do your best to get some good volume here. Okay, I'm going to ask the secretary to read the public notice.
To be published in the Journal-Inquirer Thursday, January 12th, 2023, and Thursday, January 19, 2023, South Windsor Planning and Zoning Commission. Notice is hereby given that there will be a public hearing on Tuesday, January 24, 2023 at 7 p.m. in the council chambers of the South Windsor Town Hall to consider the following. Number 1, application 22-41P, Telecommunications Facilities Zone Text Amendment. Request by the Town of South Windsor to modify Section 7.18.4 General Requirements, subsections D and J, to allow for commercial wireless towers owned by the town to be of a lattice design, limited in size. Copies of the application are on file in the office of the town clerk and/or planning department and online at https://www.southwindsorct.gov. Planning Department pages, Planning and Zoning Commission applications. At this hearing, interested persons may be heard, and written comments by the public will be received by mail or email. Persons who may require an accommodation can contact staff Monday to Friday, 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. at 860-644-2511, extension 2329. Bart Passaconis, Chairman, Planning and Zoning Commission.
Thank you very much. So at this time, I'll call our first application, which is application 22-41P, Telecommunications Facilities Zone Text Amendment. Good evening. You're not on. I don't see your light, Peter.
Here we go. Good evening, Chairman Passaconis, Vice Chairman Foley, and members of the Commission. Peter DeMelli, President and CEO of Design Professionals, Inc., 18-person practice at 21 Jeffrey Drive, always in South Windsor for the last 37 years, and we're here representing the town of South Windsor. And I'll just sign in for a moment. Thank you very much for your time and consideration this evening. With me tonight, on behalf of the town and its public safety operations, is Walt Summers. Walt, come on, behind me to the right, to your left. He's fire marshal for the town. He's also serving as the town's project manager on this facility, and I think you were also at VMP, the tower that recently installed at VMP. Also, right behind me, a couple rows behind me, is Bruce Marcus. Mr. Marcus is a telecommunications advisor, a consultant to the town with respect to this particular project I'll be enlightening you about, which prompted this particular zoning text amendment application. Also, Police Chief Christian Lindstrom, right here in the third row in the back. You've all met him many times, I'm sure. And behind him is Fire Chief Kevin Cooney. And they will give a little bit of testimony to help you with some background why we're here in a few moments. We're not going to be long. So we're here to request consideration of a zoning text amendment to section 7.18 telecommunications facilities, and specifically section 7.18.4, general requirements, items D and J, as you've noticed in your hearing notice. Before I brief you on the text amendment, just want to give you some background which prompted this application. The northwest corner of town has awful mobile radio communications reception for our first responders. That's police and fire in particular. This means they get poor or no reception for police officers, communicating with other officers in the field and back at South Windsor Police Department headquarters, and also as they're communicating with fire people and other public safety personnel. And the same thing, and that's whether on foot or in a cruiser or back at the station. And also our firefighters, our volunteer firefighters, whether on foot or on the fire apparatus or other equipment, for them communicating with dispatch, with higher level officers, with each other and with the police and other public safety people. So it gets worse even when they enter buildings, and I don't know the exact reasons for this, but as particularly commercial buildings, other buildings have evolved, it gets more and more difficult for the radio signals to penetrate these buildings. So inside buildings, it's often far worse than outside of buildings. Maybe it's electronics in there, the way they insulate buildings, steel, what have you, but it's been evolving and it gets worse over time. So where we have a critical area, we need to address those as early as we can. The area that we're speaking of that has a particular problem that's prompted this application is, again, the northwest corner of town, and that's basically along Rye Street from Sullivan Avenue up to the town line, in East Windsor town line, the west end of Sullivan Avenue. We also have along Route 5, basically from Strong Road all the way north to the East Windsor town line, that's Route 5, and also Main Street, and all the way down to the Connecticut River in the Meadows, in that general area of town. So along the Scannick River, the Connecticut River, northwest part of town, we have a fairly large area where we have poor telecommunications reception for the public safety people. This impacts the quality of radio communications for routine patrols and matters, and for emergency situations such as automobile accidents, even those with injuries, criminal activities, building fires, health emergencies, and the like. One can imagine how critical communications are during an emergency as initial assessments are made, whether from people who are there, called it in, or as our first responders get to the scene, and those first on the scene report back to the dispatchers and senior officers in both fire and police, and to other sources. So it can be very critical, precious seconds. As you know, every second is very important in an emergency situation. Hopefully we have as few as possible, and to prevent emergency situations, and when they're calling for backup and the like. So I first would like to introduce Chief Cooney, Chief of the Volunteer Fire Department for South Windsor, of long standing, and like to have him give a little testimony, if he could, just about the need for this particular facility that I'll describe in a little while, but covering the improvements in the northwest corner of town. If I may introduce Mr. Cooney.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to be here. Even with all your instructions, I have a little bit of a nasal cold, so I hope you can hear me okay. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. A quick little history on how we operate our radio system. As much as we're all using the same kind of radios, they're all separate. So the police have one radio system, the fire has another radio system. Currently, our system works off of 2 repeaters. That means when we transmit from our mobile radios or our Prober radios, they go to one of 2 repeaters. One's at the police department and one is in Vernon. What we found was the Orchard Hill climate makes Avery Heights a very poor reception area, so to fix that, we rented a tower from Marcus Communications years ago, so we have 2 repeaters now. Most of the town can be covered by those 2 repeaters. The northwest corner of town is still a very weak area where we don't have good radio coverage. So if you're down in the Meadows or somewhere like that, we can't really, the radios aren't strong enough to go from our radios to those repeaters to transmit out. So you have a firefighter or officer safety issue when you can't transmit and nobody can hear you. When we have a major fire, we go to a fire ground channel, but that causes us to have multiple units on the scene to be able to relay radio to relay. But without that extra personnel there, when we arrive first, we can't talk to anybody. We can't tell anybody we're there because the radios aren't strong enough to reach. By putting another repeater site in the northwest corner, that will increase our safety for our members to be able to communicate across the town. It will eliminate those dead spots. In addition to those dead spots that are outside, we also have some troubles inside buildings getting outside. And Mr. Marcus could probably explain the technology side of it better, but the reality is when you're on a portable radio trying to transmit from your radio inside, say, FedEx or Mobis or one of those warehouse buildings to be strong enough to hit the repeater at the police department, through those buildings with the brick and concrete and steel, it doesn't transmit that far. So when you're having another repeater site closer to those buildings, it will enhance our system. So this is going to greatly enhance the fire department system to allow us with 3 different radio repeaters in town. And we're working on more, but the more we have, the better we have. But right now, the Meadows is a horrible area for us. If we were out there doing any kind of water rescue, to transmit on the radio is almost impossible. And when we're inside these warehouse buildings, which as you guys know, we're getting more and more of those warehouses between FedEx, Mobis, and even some of the older ones, the old Nassau furniture, I'm not even sure what that's called now, but all those different buildings, when you're inside those buildings, it's challenging. It's very, very challenging. Having another repeater site closer to those buildings would certainly enhance that. So we're very much in favor of this project. So, did I confuse anybody or have any questions? No.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you, Chief. Chief Christian Lindstrom would like to address it from police perspective.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for allowing us to be here to speak. I like to think of myself as a pretty simple person, especially when it comes to technology and when it comes to radios. I just look for, if I press the button and talk, that someone hears me. 90% of our radio communications are routine, but none of them are unimportant. And then the other 10% that are real emergency communications are exponentially more important, and safety certainly becomes an issue very quickly. Anecdotally, I can tell you, in terms of police radio use, my own experiences even back in the day when I was an SRO at the middle school was a nightmare to talk to anyone on the radio because of, like as has already been said, the ability for the radio to penetrate outside of the building to get to a repeater or a tower, it just was limited. That seems to have been rectified over the years with different things, and again, I will defer to the radio experts because of my technology simplicity. I hit the button, I talk, and I want someone to hear me. But I'm sure Mr. Marcus can attest to what the technology changes are, what changes in structures have been, what they change on the towers. Currently, if you were to ask our folks where the problem areas are, they would almost unanimously say the north end of Route 5 up towards East Windsor, west of Route 5 out towards Main Street and down into the Meadows. In my pea brain, I would think that it has something to do with elevation. As you go down towards the river, you're dropping down lower. The other thing that we routinely see is penetration into and out of buildings, both from a radio to radio standpoint and a radio back to dispatch standpoint. Over the years, we've changed bands, we've had different radios, but the problems always seem to persist. So right now, like I said, just to reiterate, we're seeing issues, coverage issues and clarity issues on Route 5, well north up into towards the East Windsor town line, and even down into I-291. That area is just, it can be problematic. There are a lot of factors, and again, Mr. Marcus, I'll defer to him, but as it's been explained to me over the years, there are sometimes atmospheric conditions that play into it. There are sometimes physical obstructions, buildings, and other things that may interfere with line of sight or how the radio travels, the radio waves travel. But for us and for the rest of the command staff to have a tower on the tracks facility, the proposed site, would be advantageous and would certainly, it seems on paper, when you look at coverage maps and projections and things like that, especially with the development that's proposed, FedEx is up and running. Our folks do walkthroughs at all those new big buildings to get a lay of the land and to see it. The Home Depot warehouse, we've been down there. They were very nice, and they brought us down a few times to let us see it. So the first time we have to see it isn't during the emergency. And with some of the new ones coming, it would be important for us with these new modern buildings to have that penetration that we need, along with the FD. When seconds count, they really count. And that's the only, I'd like to say in our building that time is our most precious commodity, right? It's the only thing that we can't buy or get back. And if you're wasting time trying to get a hold of somebody, especially when their safety might be in jeopardy, that can be very costly, beyond dollars and cents. So, like I said, I think the TRAX tower would be very beneficial to us, particularly in that corner of town, that northwest corner, westward out towards the river. And I think it's something that the police department is in favor of, and I hope that the project can go through. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Lindstrom. So I think that gives you a handle on what concerns the both chiefs have with respect to their personnel in the field and how they can respond to emergency and even routine matters out there and try to prevent emergencies as well. So I think it's critical. So let me just tell you how we're proposing to address this matter and why we need a zoning text amendment. So in order to address the lack of coverage, radio coverage in the northwest corner of town, and to make the solution allowable in other poor coverage areas that may arise that I have not been briefed on, we're proposing a 125-foot high lattice tower to the rear of 124 Sullivan Avenue, which most of you know is the TRAX. It's Tyler Regional Animal Care Shelter, that we share that facility for animal control with East Hartford, Manchester, to cover our costs. It's a great regional facility. But to the rear of that, we're proposing a tower, as I said, a lattice tower, 125 feet high, and we think that's a great location, and on the base of it would be a 12 by 12 foundation, and also surrounded by an 8-foot chain link fence. So the first image I'd like to show, hopefully I can get these up here, is this one. I guess maybe you have to move this aside, you said? No, won't go, okay. Oh. Okay, thank you. Love these younger people with their technical expertise. Okay, so we have the first image here that the commission has before them in a paper printout is unlike a much larger and much taller monopole, for example, at the South Windsor Police Department, which was done many years ago, which has cellular facilities all over it, plus the radio communications. This particular lattice tower, you can see through it. Yet it will have antennae, and also it will have other equipment mounted to it. You do see through it. So for example, in this image here, you see the blue sky behind it. It's not as discernible as a solid color that you have on a larger monopole, which is much bigger and can support much more facilities, and they have platforms on the top. So that's the type of facility we're talking about right now, and with this text amendment, the commission would allow that only by special permit. So you have to go to a public hearing with a particular application, which is not before you tonight. The second image I'd like to show you, well, we'll go to this. There we go. This is just indicating the area, which just shows you under zoning. 124 Sullivan Avenue, the TRAX facility is in the RC zone right there. It's the only RC zone in the immediate areas. And then to the east of it is GC, which is, I think, Phil Tortsinas' property. Yeah. And then to the rear of that is what we know as a Meneely's facility. And then all around at Commerce Way and across the street, you've got Hyundai Mobis, the Vistar building, and the like. So it's in an industrial commercial area, and that's on the next image. Here's a copy of the site plan. There we go. Site plan, and what we're talking about, here's the building here. It used to be a firehouse, as you recall, and we replaced it with the one down the corner of West Road and Sullivan Avenue. But to the rear of the building, so far away from Sullivan Avenue, is where we're proposing a 12 by 12 foot base, surrounded by 8-foot chain link fence, and then a 125-foot lattice tower coming out of the middle of it. So that's where we're proposing to do it. Let me go down here. Here are just a couple of aerials. The first one is the aerial from the east side with the lattice tower superimposed. So here's that tower right there. You can see through parts of it.
Yep.
right here and goes up 125 feet to rear of the building. Next image is looking to the south from generally Meneilly's, the woods between Meneilly's and this facility. But here it is right here, 125 feet tall. The next image should be this one. And that's looking from the south to the north, and it shows the whole Commerce Way area, the Dunkin' Donuts bakery, regional bakery facility to the west side of it, and all the buildings along Commerce Way with Meneilly's facility in the back. And the future, I guess, retail plaza, is that what they're considering? For Phil Tertsinas's group, right there, and then Rice Street over here. So, and here's the Hyundai Mobis building right here, and to the east of that would be the Vistar Performance Food Group's building. And here's sort of like a real good aerial looking over the top of the regional bakery for Dunkin' Donuts and showing it here.
Yeah.
Here's the lattice tower itself here, 125 feet in height, and nothing really much around it. And you'll notice there's no residential zones, and there are no residences in the close proximity to this particular facility. Then we go into the zoning text changes, and I'll just continue on. Here we go. And let me just blow this up a little bit. Here we go. Okay, so in section 718.4, under general requirements D, we're looking at D and J. Under D, proposal, remove the requirement for 1,000 feet for such a facility to any of these telecommunications towers to a playground. That's so we have multiple options available to the town. For example, they want to put a cellular tower. We have one at VMP in case there's a playground ever located there. There's possibility that that would help out the town in terms of getting cellular coverage there for those facilities. So we're talking about, in that one, it would be for the monopoles. And then for J, what we're doing here is saying that the monopole design is generally for commercial wireless. However, the town can, for communication needs of the town, provide lattice design, which are the less intrusive and lower facilities. Maximum height of 125 feet, which is 50 feet lower than what you have up above in C. That's 175 feet, so we're dropping down to 125, which is all we need for these. And then the base of the tower would have a footprint not exceeding 12 foot by 12 foot. Some other considerations for these, and that's the extent of the changes. Some other considerations, it's, I think, better aesthetics. We're not as obtrusive. You don't have the big platforms and all the equipment up on top as you do with a monopole. Operational costs, I've been told it's about 25% to 30% less expensive to operate this for service and maintenance. Also, initial capital costs, we're hearing somewhere in the neighborhood, pre-COVID it was about $250,000 for this facility, and now with the supply chain issues and all that stuff, it's now about $500,000 for the lattice tower. It'd be even much more with a monopole design, at least $100,000 more for that. So capital costs are considerably less, and it's easier to get it up and operating. Another item is ease of access to equipment and antennae. You can install rigging to service it rather than having to bring in a huge crane every time like they have to do for the monopoles at great expense. And also your regulations, if I was reading through it, Michelle, I think originally adopted July 15th, 1997, I believe. Sound about right? So we're talking quite some time ago, and we think this change, relatively minor change, would serve the best interests of the South Windsor and its public safety officers. Also, this facility is needed at the earliest possible juncture, for it really is a matter of safety for our citizens and for our first responders. And as both chiefs have indicated, every second is important in emergencies, and when you're trying to prevent an emergency. And without proper radio communications, our safety people are at a grave disadvantage, and so aren't the public. So we're available for any questions. So again, we have Bruce Marcus here, who's the advisor, telecommunications advisor to the town for this project. Also, Walt Summers, the fire marshal, who is the project manager for the town, and Chief Lindstrom and also Chief Cooney, representing the police and fire departments respectively. So we're available for any questions you may have. Again, the site plan part of it, the special exception, we're not doing, we need to give you some background, that's all, and we haven't gone into a lot of details on that. But if you choose to approve this text amendment, then the town could apply for a special permit, which requires public hearing by state law, a special permit application to get this thing going. So that's where we're at. Minor text amendment. Hopefully you agree with us that it'd be an important way to advance this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At this time, we'll turn to our town staff, our Director of Planning, Michelle Lipe.
Thank you. So this is a request by the Town of South Windsor Emergency Service Agencies to modify Section 7.18.4, General Requirements, subsection D and J. Mr. Malley did a good job explaining. Subsection D relates to the elimination of a playground under consideration when you have a telecommunication facility. And then subsection J would allow for a lattice construction type tower, which right now the regulations prohibit. This would only be allowed if the town was the applicant in the 125 feet with a 12 by 12 foot area being the design requirements. As indicated, any tower would go through a public hearing through a special exception, and the neighborhood consideration impacts would be evaluated at the time of the public hearing. The business development section of our town plan has one of its goals to attract additional business developments consistent with the character and scale of its surroundings, with a strategy to maintain current business zones with updates. I think this falls into the category of a business need we have to make sure that our businesses are safe in our community, and also addressing the town's current emergency service need. We did refer this to the Capital Region Council of Government as required. I did get a memo back November 18th stating that the staff of Regional Planning Commission at CROG has reviewed this referral and finds no apparent conflict with regional plans and policies or concerns of neighboring towns. I just would comment that in 1997, when we put these regulations in place, the Siting Council did not have control of telecommunication towers at that time. It was done at the local level. It was shortly thereafter that the state Siting Council took control. So these regulations come into play when it is not something that's under the jurisdiction of the Telecommunications Act. So something like a cell tower is. So how that would work and how it works currently is anytime a cell tower is proposed or proposed to be modified, like a new dish goes up, the town, my department, as well as the mayor, I believe, gets notified of the change being proposed, and we have the opportunity to request a public hearing if we had one of concern that we wanted to provide input to. So I guess my point is, although we're looking to change something related to the playground issue, at the end of the day, that really is a Siting Council issue, whether or not a tower would be located in that location. We as a town could have input into that and say, geez, we don't think it's a good idea, or we think it's a great idea, but I just wanted to be clear, this regulation was really put in prior to the Siting Council's existence. Over the years, we haven't had too many towers come around, and we have several around town, but they don't come in front of you for approval because they are Siting Council towers. We've just seen them lately with VMP, and now this one being town towers, and that's why you're seeing them come in. So I hope I didn't confuse it. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. No engineering comments? Okay, thank you. So at this time, we'll turn to the public. Is there anyone from the public who would like to speak in favor of this application? Please step forward. Hearing and seeing none, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak against or have questions or concerns? Please step forward. Hearing and seeing none, we'll turn to commissioners. Commissioner Viteri.
My only question is regarding eliminating playgrounds and the restriction next to playgrounds. And right now, if you take the word playground out, then it could be right next to a playground. I mean, I could understand to some degree, but I'm not sure why you would want to completely absolve playgrounds from being protected.
Yeah, one consideration for that is that you want coverage even when there's a playground. And you may have an area of a gap. So having that there, what's more important, having coverage there so we can respond to an emergency situation or not? And I think it'll give you the flexibility to do that. But the thing is, with Michelle's remarks, if it has a cell tower at all on it, then it's regulated by the State Siting Council. Yeah, any telecommunications tower. Yeah. So not the one for the lattice tower we're talking about, but for a commercial one, then that would be regulated by Siting Council, not by this commission. So we're really talking about without cellular on it, to have radio communications for all public safety people getting in that site, even if there's a playground there, I think you still want to have the communications available in that area. So,
No, I can
and
understand.
it's a restriction is 1,000 feet too.
No, and that's what I was going to say. Maybe you want to make it a lesser restriction. It's just the idea of a 125-foot tower that could fall on the playground, even if you made the restriction 200 feet or something like that. I don't know. It's just one of those things. You know, I truly appreciate the importance of setting this up. I think communications amongst fire and police is extremely important, but it just seems that, I don't know, maybe I'm overplaying it in my head, but it just seems.
Valid. So at VMP, that's the only thing we're thinking of right now, which may be a possibility. I know we have areas of cellular coverage that are undesirable down in that neck of the woods. I know I deal with it every single day I travel. But we're about 500 feet, I think, from the fence enclosure at VMP to this new monopole tower. So if you reduce it from 1,000 feet to something so you could still do it, then we have the coverage we need for responses by our fire and police officers, and then we can address that situation. So yeah, maybe not right on top of it. Yeah, the maximum height is 175 feet in the
Right.
regulations. So I don't know if the siting council can allow higher, but I know the one at the police department is, I think, around just shy of 200 feet, if I recall correctly. But 175 feet falling, so maybe you say 200 feet.
Right.
Then you address that situation,
Okay.
if it were to fall. But I think you still want the coverage for grandchildren.
No,
and
I
things that you
absolutely,
might be interested in.
absolutely think the idea is absolutely on point.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cavagnero.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. So going off of Commissioner Viteri, I was concerned about the playground regulation as well. I think first, before I even want to go into that, I do want to question our Director of Planning on this. Just, on the record, there is a reason why we have the term playground on subsection D, right?
I mean, we differentiate playground from, we call out a playground in the subsection, yes. But I can't really give you a very good reason. At the time, I think, at the time that we drafted this regulation, we were trying to consider, where we might or might not want cell towers to be. But again, that's back in 1997, I think, before cell towers were what they are today. So, in not knowing the technology and the impacts of the technology, I think at that time we were probably a little bit more cautious, of where we wanted to locate them.
All
I
right.
guess the best answer I can give you.
All right, gotcha. I think trying to mediate something in the middle of that, if other commissioners were concerned about the playground regulation, I think something we could do is either citing it as an outdoor playground, since I think comparing it to an indoor playground is, again, if we are trying to say which one is safer compared to a tower, of course I'd say the indoor playground, but also if that doesn't work, either a different foot regulation, maybe 200 feet, something that actually matches, or maybe 175 that matches the cap of how tall these towers could be. Those are my two recommendations of trying to, get a compromise. Because, like I said, I am somewhat concerned about the playground regulation, but it's not a presser. It's just something I was curious about. I think going down to subsection J, I see the differentiation between commercial towers and town-owned towers. However, I see with commercial towers, we are calling them wireless, and town-owned communication towers we're not calling wireless. Is there a reason for that, or is it just just down to it?
Mr. Marcus will address that.
Okay.
I'm Bruce Marcus, CTO of Marcus Communications. Been doing this for 54 years, and the term wireless had become synonymous with cellular, but there's other wireless. I mean, the radio communications for the town is wireless. I mean, it's running by radio, but the term wireless has been picked up by the Siting Council and everybody else to mean cellular and other types of broadband communications. And when regulations came out originally, there was a lot of pushback about having exposure, RF exposure. I'm an expert on RF exposure. I go out and make the measurements. It's infinitesimal, okay? And all these cell towers have to meet those regulations anyway, so that the human exposure is minimum anyway. And then they came up with the fall zone. And a lot of these towers don't fall, but it was a way to regulate them away from things and the way to regulate them out of town. Then the Siting Council came in and said, no, if it's a need, you will have it. And you've had some of them come into town, and they're placed in lots of places. If you look at the one at the police department here, and if you look at the one at the Manchester Police Department, it's right next to Illing. And it could fall in the playground at Illing, in theory, okay? It's a 190-foot tower there. They don't fall. These are in a special class. The public safety towers have to be stronger to meet wind load and hurricane and high wind requirements for the area. They're even more regulated for the amount of steel that they have to have, so they don't fall. We haven't seen any fall that haven't been misdesigned. There are extremes out in the Midwest and stuff where there have been ice on them and people put too much on them. The landlord said, oh, just keep putting the antenna on. Just keep putting the antenna on because you look at the revenue. Here they're designed, they require peer review. Anything over 70 feet has to have 2 engineers, the one that designed it and the one that approves it for the town. So there's double checks going on for these things, so you don't have to worry about them falling over. But you need the coverage to get into penetration in those buildings. As buildings are built, more file cabinets go in, more vertical bays for storage in Amazons and stuff like that. Penetration becomes difficult. You know by your own cell phones. You go into certain buildings, the cell phones don't work. There might be a cell tower just outside, but you won't get the coverage if you go into the dense building. Any other questions?
I'm not sure if that answers the question. I was just curious why we were classifying commercial towers wireless, because I wasn't sure if that would be regulating ourselves too much. If there was a future application that was commercial, they wanted to have a tower and it wouldn't be wireless. But I think you're trying to say that commercial wireless towers are really just going to be cell towers, and for the most part, all commercial towers are going to be wireless.
Yeah.
Okay, that was just what I was curious about. I think the last question I have, and again, I'll have to refer to our Director of Planning here. Michelle, do we have any towers that exceed the height of 125 feet in South Windsor right now?
Yes, I think all of our cell towers do. That you have around town, yep.
Okay, that's,
And they're all monopole towers that you have too.
gotcha. Those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner LeBlanc.
Thank you. The only concerns I have are just design comments, really. I've worked at these in the past. Actually, it was quite some time ago. I'm assuming it's galvanized steel construction, something that's not needing to be painted, looking ahead, maintenance-wise.
Yes, solid steel, and they all are, yes.
Okay. The problem we had, I'm thinking back when I worked with these, is that once you build it and you load it up, I mean, I realize that the attachments are somewhat porous today and lighter than they once were, but they created an off-balance by mounting different antennas off to the main truss or tower, if you will, creating an imbalance, and we've had one actually twist. That was the load that not tip over, but actually it rotated because of what's attached to it. When you attach, and it's looking ahead, I've seen these when I travel too, where some towns will load them up, then 10 years out, you get 25 different attachments on it, and it becomes almost an eyesore and not the original intent of what it's supposed to be. And the last thing we had was, well, being first responders, and it's probably not an issue, but you know, kids would climb these things after a while and hang stuff off of it. But imagine being police and fire, it won't be an issue here, but just a concern I have to keep people off of it. That's all.
Yeah, there is a 8-foot fence all the way around it.
Okay.
So it is a secure site. So there shouldn't be anybody getting in there. Do you have any experience?
It's secured, there'll be an alarm system, so.
Oh, even going to be an alarm system, somebody gets in there.
All right, great, thank you.
Commissioner Foley?
Just a quick question on, you know, why are we restricting ourselves to the 125 feet? If the police headquarters has 200 at the moment, I mean, if we need to go, is it a necessity, Bruce? Or?
Excuse me, if you could wait until you get up to the
Propagation
microphone.
standpoint, I like taller.
What's
Taller is-
that?
Taller is better, higher is better. There's the only, the primary tower that the town uses that's over on Box Mountain is on an 800-foot hill, and that tower is 450 feet. So it provides communications for South Windsor, Manchester, and other towns from it, and all the ambulances from the region operate from that tower. But taller is better. You might need taller at some point. It's always better to allow whatever they might apply for. The only restriction becomes FAA rules. If there's any aircraft nearby, they have to, you know, weigh that. And there used to be a small field up on Route 5.
Bancroft's runway.
Bancroft's.
Yeah.
Grass field up there. But as far as I'm concerned, higher makes it easier to make coverage. The town chose to apply for 125 because that would fill in this area that they wanted. And it does look into the river is what the point is. You get to look into the river and those buildings around it. But if you don't want to restrict it and you want to allow for more, they can come by and apply for more. You want to change your regulation, that's all.
I guess, Walter?
Good
Do
evening,
you,
everybody.
do you see a future need, and if, say if we just said 200 feet with a base of 20 foot by 20 foot, you know, I mean,
The sites we're looking at, this is probably, I'll cross my fingers, probably the last tower we'll need.
okay.
The other site that we're looking at is actually going back on Old Orchard Hill School. We have fiber up there now. But those would be roof-mounted antennas to really cover, I think, up by Cornerstone and stuff. There might be some shadows from Box Mountain. I've been talking to Chris Hack about that. That's probably phase 2, and once I think we get done with that, we're gonna have really good coverage in town. The height was chosen over here just based on looking at our current coverage. With VMP coming online in probably about 4 weeks, that's up 175. You're at 190 at the PD, which still kind of looks down Sullivan Ave pretty good. We were thinking that, 125 would be a good height down at tracks, but, if you want to go up another 25 feet just to give us a little leeway, we would not be opposed to that.
Is there a reason, Michelle, why I'm just trying to, if there's a need to let the first responders have what they need.
No, I think they're probably trying to minimize the idea of a lattice tower, since lattice towers were prohibited. They're trying to minimize what they needed, but if you wanted to make it to 150, you could do that as part of your,
We put that
change.
number in there really actually to start the discussion, and if you're comfortable with 150, we'd make it work. We do obviously the radio studies to see exactly what height we would need, but, 150 is fine with us. We put the 125 in there, in consulting with Michelle just to get a number in there, so.
I think in this case, more is better. Just, thank you.
Okay.
Commissioner Wagner?
Thank you. Going down my notes, and you've actually answered it, talked about the tower at VMP. This is clearly important. I think you've explained why you don't want to do a monopole. I don't find that objectionable. The siting council does not deal with the type of communication we're talking about here, is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
They don't.
To me, I think Commissioner Cavagnaro mentioned the falling of one of these things. Isn't there a section in here, and I was looking for it, where we deal with the fall zone? Seems to me that's the only thing we worry about with a playground, so that it not fall on a playground.
I remember that kind of being part of the regulations. I think in section B, you have your front and side yard, which is 3/4 of the height of the tower. It's B1. I was trying to find that fall zone too. There was,
Yeah, okay, certainly B1 on 718.5, section B1, yeah. Okay,
you know, fall zone for the height of the tower is, we can design that, you know.
to me, I mean, this may sound funny, but the police chief will probably appreciate this. Birds can be a problem with these things. Is there an issue in this particular site with, are we going to get less birds than we get at the police station?
There are mitigations you can do on them. If you look at the PD tower, they have those spinning little things. I don't think it works that well, obviously. But with the monopole, you put up the platform, I think that attracts birds a lot more than the lattice. They don't have a place to put their nests.
Okay. I'm looking at the first page, item B, and I'm thinking about playgrounds, and I don't see anything particular about playgrounds or schools versus, say, residences. In other words, I don't see why schools and playgrounds need more protection than residences. And I'm just thinking, do we need paragraph D, 718.4D? Do we need it at all? And I think it may be in there because of, you know, historical fears of the public from all this kind of radiation. And those fears, I think, have been proven to be no longer an issue. So I don't know who would like to comment on that. But why are we even bothering to talk about schools and playgrounds? And if we are, not talking about residences, so, I don't know, Mr. Damali, or, I forget your name, sir.
I wasn't intimately involved with this, I wasn't director of planning at the time, but it was a long time ago.
No, I have to assume, and I'm trying to recall, but I have to assume it was not knowing. You know, it was you didn't know what the effects would be, so you put in some precautions of a distance from schools.
So personally, I would remove paragraph D entirely rather than editing it.
Because the only other one you have something that says 500 feet from a residence, so you do have a 500-foot distance from residence.
Okay. Oh, yeah, the fall zone is covered in 718.3. And there's a little bit of a wording issue. It's, the zone is a distance, and I think you're talking about an area within the distance of the falling, you know, change it so it's dealing with the area rather than the distance. If we are going to leave paragraph D in, then I would deal with what kind of schools are we talking about? You know, preschools, daycares, you know, what kind of schools are we talking about? You know, but again, I'd rather remove paragraph D.
This just says by persons under 18 years of age, so I mean, that's the qualifier in here, so. But you could certainly strike D altogether if that's what you wanted to do.
Yeah, and maybe other commissioners will comment on that. Paragraph J, I guess it kind of bothers me that we're distinguishing town-owned from commercial. That seems kind of arbitrary. If we don't mind lattice towers up to 150 feet for the town, then why would we mind them if a commercial facility wants to put them in? So I would remove the distinction between town-owned and commercial.
You can design a lattice tower to accommodate cellular service.
Yep.
So you can do that. You can either monopole or a lattice one.
I mean, I think it's kind of unfair for the town to say, well, we can do it, but nobody else can do it.
Gives you, the way we have it read right now, the way for lattice towers, you have maximum control. So it's only town, so if somebody wants to propose one, they could come back in with an amendment. If you liked it, you could add it in. But you can also say, hey, let's make it an even playing field. The town could do it, or private sector could do it. The town right now apparently only needs one of these, and then we'll get the coverage we need, plus what the old Orchard Hill School area, put a lower one in. So that's all we need, we think, in the foreseeable future. But then you can open it up to other private individuals to do them. Lattice towers, because you don't allow it right now. Lattice towers, and they could come in as well. So you don't have to say town if you want to open it up beyond the municipal need.
Okay. On that same paragraph, we talk about the base of the tower not to be greater than 12 by 12.
Right.
What's the base of this tower?
12 feet by 12 feet. It'll be that size.
What do you mean by the base? I'm thinking of something that looks like the Eiffel Tower fanning out, but this is not
just
that.
basically a concrete foundation.
Okay, thank you. The word monopole appears throughout, and since we're allowing other kinds, we ought to go through the, for example, 718.5B, all freestanding monopole towers. So maybe we ought to just look through and make sure it covers all towers, since we're now allowing non-monopole towers to be built. So, and there may be other places in there. I assume in paragraph Q, the design of all commercial wireless shall comply with the standards promulgated by the FCC, et cetera. I assume that's being checked as part of this design. Thank you. And there's a paragraph about noise regulations, paragraph S, just above 718.5, talks about noise. I guess maybe I'll just repeat what I've said many times before. I don't think our noise regulations really protect people that well. So I don't know if we want to tighten up the noise regulations. I mean, if this thing's running a generator in the middle of the night near a residential,
What Mr. Summers was just indicating was there are 3 generators at Sand Hill, and that's only if the power goes off. Only for emergency backup.
yeah, okay.
So it's an
You're right.
infrequent application.
And again, a language issue, not on 718.7B and C, we talk about personal wireless facility. Maybe we ought to change that to telecommunications facility or something like that. Those are my comments.
Okay. Commissioner Dexter.
I'll be brief. Paragraph D, if the residence is 500 feet, I don't see why we wouldn't just change that and leave playground in there, because every resident has a playground if you think about it, you know, and that would keep it consistent between the 2 bullets. And then on J, I agree with Commissioner Foley. We should at least go up to 150 for a height and give some leeway there.
Commissioner Carey.
problem with being last is everybody says all the important things. But I agree with you, with Commissioner Dexter and Commissioner Cavanero and Terry. I think we should have some space and the playground shouldn't be struck. You know, we can tighten it up, but don't strike it.
Okay. I have concerns about striking the playground language, just because I'd like to keep them away from playgrounds where kids are going to be playing. I don't want this to become an extended play space. The further they are away from the kids, the better. I agree with the 150 feet for height, but I also think if you're engineering it, you have to put the correct number in for the base. If you're going to change the height, that will probably make the base a little bit bigger. I'm guessing probably 15 by 15 instead of 12 by 12. But I don't want to limit you on one part of the regulations, and then the other part, you got to be non-compliant. So
Beef it up a little bit would be a good idea.
I'm just offering the 15 by 15 if you think that's adequate for 150.
Yeah, that's what we're thinking. A little bit bigger, hold on.
20 by 20 is fine. Okay.
Looks like 20 by 20 would be more than adequate.
Okay. Again, I do like to keep the distance as much as possible. I think it's important, safety-wise. The further is better. I would say at least 200 feet. I do like Commissioner Dexter's 500 feet, but I also don't want to restrict or make it so much of a distance that you can't have one at the old Orchard Hill. So where's the happy medium?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if we go with 2 times the fall zone,
Yep.
we think we can, on all our applications, we think that'll work.
Okay. That, using that language instead of a fixed amount, I'm fine with that. Twice the fall zone.
Yep.
That's good.
And then depends on the height of the structure. It's 150 feet, and you got
Okay.
300 feet.
And Q, as Steve pointed out, I highlighted that over here. Any application will comply with Q, correct, for the regulations?
They're required to. They're
Yeah.
required under the current,
Okay.
State
Well, I
and
didn't
local
hear a
regulations.
acknowledgement from Steve's answer, but, or his
he was
question
concerned
is.
about, is it adequate, the ordinance and the state law, but it's required to comply.
Yep,
Yes.
okay,
Yep.
good. Okay, commissioners, any other questions, comments, concerns? Alan?
I apologize. I do have one more point I do want to add. This is not a question. So I think I found a legal loophole with subsection D as it stands right now, actually. As I read it, it says, no commercial wireless telecommunication site shall be located within 1,000 feet of a playground or school primarily attended by persons less than 18 years of age. How I read that hypothetically is, let's say this text amendment doesn't pass and the language right there currently stands. If a commercial tower application were to come into South Windsor next year, they could say, or the scenario is a tower goes right next to a playground. They could say, well, that playground isn't attended by people of the age primarily of 18 and less. I think as I read this, you know, within grammar, it says playground or school primarily attended. I'm not sure if that was intended or if that was a mistake, but, you know, as I read it right now, it stands that as long as it's a playground that is not primarily attended 18 years of age or less, a tower can go right next to it. That's how I read it. So I think regardless, I think amending subsection D is important tonight.
Commissioner Wagner?
So I heard a suggestion to change the distance for twice the fall zone. I'm comfortable with that, if the other commissioners are. I would ask, I didn't actually see on your map where the nearest playground is. You must have had some reason for wanting to strike that, so how far away is the nearest playground?
It's far away. Oh, yeah, it only applies to VMP.
Okay.
The one that we're most concerned about right now for the northwest corner, we're far away from any. I mean,
Okay.
was it Eli Terry? I'm not sure what the closest
So-
is, but it's quite a hike.
So if we look at the VMP site, does that twice the fall zone give you enough room to build there?
Yes.
Okay,
Twice the fall height would definitely do it there.
all right, that's
We're
great.
not sure about the 500 feet. That's why we would like that twice the fall height. Because we're considering the enclosure, that whole area over there, and it might be within 500 feet close to that. So the fall zone thing, twice the fall zone would be fine.
All right, thank you, that's all I had.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners, anything else? Okay, hearing and seeing none, anything else, staff? Applicant, all set?
We're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Then we will close this public hearing at,
Do we really want to close it, or do we want to get the revised text?
if you're not comfortable with what we discussed, then, because we're going to have to make a motion. If you want to get the revised text first, we're not going to act on it tonight.
Right, but, I mean, I'd like to see the revised text.
Are there any immediate concerns that it has to be acted on tonight? Okay, okay.
We'd just like to get it done as soon as possible so we can get going on the project. We still have to return to you with a special permit application.
Okay, Michelle, when's the next time we could,
Your next public hearing would be February 14th.
happy?
I'd be-
Okay.
I'd
So
be
one or two things
comfortable
could happen.
closing the public hearing just so we see the revised
I was gonna
text
say-
before we vote on it.
I could draft revised regulations based on the public hearing comments for your motion for decision, if that's what you want. So
Okay.
we put on for decision on the 14th, but still had to
Yeah.
close the hearing
And
tonight.
we have no objection to that because we understand exactly what you're talking about, and we're comfortable with it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we will close the public hearing on this application at 8:02 PM. Thank you. Okay. And we will go into our regular meeting. I'll just call the regular meeting to order for January 24, 2023. Our first item is public participation. I do want to note that we did receive letters about an application that is under litigation, and those letters have been delivered to the commissioners, but they're not going to be read at this time because it's under litigation. Did talk to the town attorney, and she was comfortable with us handling it this way. So, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak on anything that is not on our agenda tonight? Please step forward. Hearing and seeing none, we'll move into our minutes. Did anybody have any corrections to the minutes? I had a bunch that were really just typos. There was one item about the Michaels that is a little bit confusing because on page 2, under our town planner's report, it's reported that the trucks exiting the site will be heading south on Route 5 and will use Chapel Road Access Drive.
Yeah, I
And
think
then later
they
in the
clarified.
thing, it's cleared up that they will just be using Route 5. Those trucks will not be on Chapel Road anymore.
Correct, so we can strike it out of the report, because it
Okay.
was cleared up.
And what I did, Caitlin, I have it all my changes on mine. I will give you mine when we're done. I'm not sure if Steve has any additional ones, or any commissioners have any additional ones.
I mean, I sent some to Caitlin that were all typos as well.
Okay.
Nothing substantive.
Yep. And one of them, on page 4, it just says, Mr. Doolittle then briefly highlighted the next project, the reconstruction of Kennedy Road. He commented that they did apply and receive a by the state for 80%. So I just want to make sure that's cleared up. Okay, if everybody's comfortable with these typo corrections, I'll just give my copy to Caitlin, and we'll agree to the minutes as modified by consensus. Agreed. Okay, awesome. Our next item was the discussion on the telecommunications facility. That'll be on Valentine's Day. Then we have, under new business number 2, determination letter for Unit 5, Evergreen Walk. Michelle, do you want to just?
Yeah, I can just give you a brief overview. Some of you were on the commission years ago when we put in new regulations for drive-through facilities in the Buckland Gateway Development Zone. If you recall at the time, that was primarily driven by a Panera that wanted to go in down there, and a text amendment was put forward by the Evergreen Walk Lifestyles at that time, different than Charter Realty, who's down there today, but it was put forward. It was really designed around the Lifestyle being a large unit of over 200,000 square foot of development, and a bunch of other parameters which are in the regulations. We have a potential user of Unit 5, and the question came up of the interpretation of the 200,000 square feet as part of a unit. I know at the time it was derived because Panera was going into that specific location, and we were coming up with some parameters would limit the proliferation of these all over the place as standalones. So it was the 200,000 square feet was put in. As this potential user indicated, they are part of the planned unit development Evergreen Walk, which is a much larger than 200,000 square feet. So in my opinion, it was really something that it's your regulation that you should be interpreting it, but I do understand their interpretation, and I do agree it is larger, it is part of a larger development of greater than 200,000 square feet. Just to give you some context, across the street, if you were to look at what you approved in the Gateway development, you don't have that threshold across the street there yet. So if someone were to try to go in over there in the Gateway development, you're not at a 200,000 square foot threshold of a planned unit development, so they wouldn't meet that criteria. So I think before we, had them go forward with an application, I think it was in their best interest to have them come in front of the commission, just make sure you interpret it the same way so that we didn't run into a problem later on down. Again, I agree with the letter written. I think it does fall within the Evergreen Walk larger picture of a planned unit development. We, from a zoning perspective, look at it as one big, huge piece, although it's been carved up in a lot of smaller units, but it is part of a larger one big site plan that's been approved. Okay. And I think there's a gentleman here from the audience tonight. If you have any specific questions, I think he could answer those for you.
Okay. Commissioners, anyone want to start? I mean, I could go around, or we'll go around real quick. Commissioner Carey, any?
So I apologize, but when we're saying Unit 5, which unit is that?
That's a unit that has the bank on it. It would be the piece of property directly across from what was LA Fitness. So it's really the last unit that hasn't been developed with the exception of a back unit. Okay. So it would be as you come down Cedar, immediately to your left where the bank is almost completed construction.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Dexter?
If we were to interpret that Unit 5 as part of the larger plan, would there still be restrictions on how that site is laid out with this drive-through?
They would be subject to all the other requirements that are in the regulations related to drive-throughs. Yep. And just a point of clarification, Shake Shack was determined not to be a drive-through per these regulations, it's a pickup window. So that doesn't fall into the same category as a drive-through facility. Just for point of reference, they don't have the kiosk, they don't have the drive-through menu board or any of those stations. So that's why that's a standalone and can be, because it's a pickup window.
Okay, Commissioner Wagner?
I'm comfortable with this interpretation. At some point, we'll need help how to phrase the motion, but
Okay, Commissioner Foley?
At this time, I have nothing.
Okay, Commissioner LeBlanc?
No comment, thank you.
Commissioner Cavagnaro?
No comment.
Commissioner Viteri?
No comment.
Okay, Michelle, just so I'm understanding it correctly, banks are not,
We do not treat the drive-through facilities of banks as we do a drive-through for a restaurant. They're
Okay.
treated differently.
and a drive-through for a restaurant, am I remembering it correctly that it can't be a standalone building, it has to be?
A multi-tenanted building, correct. That's why you have Panera and I think it's Nail Salon located
Okay.
with it. Yep.
Then I'm comfortable with the interpretation of the square footage and them being a
So I
part
don't
of
think a motion's
Evergreen Walk.
necessary. If it's consensus, you're comfortable with it, you don't really have to do a motion, Steve.
Okay. Is that our consensus? Agreed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, our next item, number 3, is discussion and review of the draft residential regulations. I'll
So-
turn to our town planner.
So I handed these out at the last meeting. These, again, just to refresh everybody's memory, these regulations are out on our website. These are the residential regulations related to changes. There are a variety of changes. We've got inclusionary zoning in those. We have some changes to some of the ways that we calculate square footages of our lots. We have some interior lot minor changes, kind of a gamut of changes. I can go through them if anybody has any specific questions. I think at this point, since we have a document that we've sent off to CROG, at this point, any changes we would take up at the public hearing and actually make through the public hearing process. But I don't know if anybody had any questions or if they wanted any clarification. We did have 2 different subcommittees work on these, so you're kind of seeing each other's work for the first time. So really, that was kind of what the reason for today was, if anybody wanted to chime in on any specific questions.
Okay, and we're going
Residential
for
first.
specific questions on the residential first.
Correct.
So, Commissioner Dexter?
Start. Because we talked about this a little bit in the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and for the public who might be listening tonight, you speak about a fee in lieu, that if a contractor comes in, developer comes in, and they don't want to put in 10 or 15% affordable housing, they can pay a fee.
So the way the regulation's crafted right now, that is called inclusionary zoning, and we are making provisions for inclusionary zoning in our regulations. What we have drafted is throughout the multifamily type regulations that we have, whether it's your town center regulation, your multifamily zone, your independent elderly housing, any of those, we've put in a percentage of affordable that would be required. We have not offered a buyout procedure in the multifamily regulations, so if you have an affordable percentage, that's the expectation is that's how much affordable we provided. With subdivisions, we're treating subdivisions differently. Once you're creating 4 or more lots, there's a formula that would be applied, and that would be the affordable housing fee, if you will. The formula is based on the zone that you're in, the number of lots that you're creating. It's based on a typical square footage of a smaller house in that zone. And then we have a figure from the International Code Council of what a square footage cost is. So it's a calculation that would be made at the time of a subdivision request and or approval, and it would be a fee that, I gave some examples, I think, in the text. An A20 zone would be somewhere around an $8,000 a lot fee. An A40 RR zone, which are our larger zones, AA30 zones, would be somewhere $10,000, $11,000. Again, it depends on at the time of the application and a bunch of variables related, but those are some of the examples based on the latest numbers. So that would be that money that was collected as part of those fees would be put into an affordable housing trust fund. I make that analogous to your fee in lieu of open space fund that we have. It would be similar in nature in that it would be put aside and not spent other than through actions to support affordable housing. So it will be a fund, obviously, that will take some time to build up. We don't have a lot of subdivision activity in town currently, but it could go towards seed money towards your housing authority work, or some towns use it for other nonprofit agencies that might be coming to their town to do affordable housing, or you might do some deed restriction purchasing. So how and when it gets used would be something to be determined, but the idea is to start with some money. And I think we looked at a lot of different ways of doing it, and I think this was one that we felt was fairly understandable to the general public and to developer, and something that probably would be something we could manage from a staff
And
perspective.
just a quick follow-up, Michelle. Is it just this fee that would go into this fund, or could there be other grants or other monies that could go in?
This time, it's just set up that way, but it certainly could be something that could be made into a bigger fund and get leveraged with other kinds of money, sure. If you recall, in our affordable housing plan, we talked about creating a housing committee. That's kind of like one of the next steps here, so that we can kind of have an umbrella committee to kind of keep track of our affordable housing as we move forward, because it's going to become more and more important.
Yeah, good job, everybody who was on the committee, really good.
Okay. Steve? Nothing? Okay. Kevin? So everybody's comfortable with what they are so far? And these are all on our website for the public to view. There might even be a couple copies in the back of the room, correct? Or, okay, Caitlin has copies.
And certainly if people need copies, we can make them available to them, but it's all out there on, you can get to it under the planning and zoning, under the pending application link, under the planning department pending application link. And there's a spot right there too that you can submit comments as well, right there on the website if people want to do that.
Okay.
Just another, I have some notes.
Oh, please.
The Public Act 2129, the parking requirement, are we going to opt out of that? Is that what I read, or?
Yeah, so that says that you can't require more than one space per unit. I think through our regulations, we have some different calculations. I remember when we did our town center regulation, we worked quite a bit on the calculation. We came out 1.75. I would recommend opting out of it because we just aren't a community that's a transit community yet. I mean, we just don't have enough bus service and enough people that are out of cars yet. I think the idea is as we become more transit-oriented, we may see less need for parking, but a lot of that need is really in the cities where they don't have as much parking need. So all of our regulations have required more than one space per unit typically. What my experience has been is the developers really don't want to build more parking than they need, so they're usually figuring it out right down to what spaces they need, and they propose it. So it would be my recommendation to opt out of it. And again, that's a similar process to the accessory apartment that we opted out of, where you have to, as a commission, opt out, and then it would go to the town council for consideration as well.
One more. And then there was some text about multifamily dwellings, and that if it's more than 4, then there was an affordable factor. And this is what my question is. If there are 2 duplexes, that's 4 dwelling units, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So that would then be under the 15% guidelines that if you round up, one of those 4 would have to be affordable. Am I thinking right?
That's how I would, yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we'll move on to discussion item number 4, review of the draft warehouse regulations.
Don't we need to schedule a public hearing on the previous one?
The public hearing, we need 35 days from the time that we submit it to CROG.
Yeah, we've already sent these have already gone to CROG. We actually got a response from CROG already, but we're slated for February 14th to start the public hearings on the residential. I just wanted to make sure you didn't have any questions in general, just having seen them. So I'm going to kind of work backwards on this next regulation just to give a little context, and then we can go through whatever you want to look at. But what I have being passed around right now is a map. And this is a map that the warehouse subcommittee used. This is kind of the end result of the map, if you will, looking at our industrial corridor in relationship to our residential zoning boundary. And why this map is important is it kind of draws out two different dimensions, a 500-foot dimension and a 750-foot dimension. And in the draft regulations that we provided for you, one of the things that we did is we put in definitions for the different types of facilities, whether it's a distribution facility, a freight terminal, bus terminal. So there's definitions to define them, and then there's also a distance from a residential zone boundary where they can be proposed. So, for example, a distribution facility cannot be proposed any closer than 500 feet from a residential boundary line. I think 750 was the most for a facility like Amazon last mile facility. So that's kind of one of the big things I think this committee wanted to focus on was definitions. What was a freight terminal versus a distribution facility? So we worked on definitions, and then the second thing was understanding that they impact our residential zones. I think the committee really did not feel adding another intermediate zone was appropriate. It just didn't kind of work where we were with our development pattern right now. So what we ended up doing is putting some restrictions in for properties that are closer to the residential zones, things that are now by special exception that maybe were by as of right uses before. So you'll find that in your use table, we've added some changes to some of the uses. Again, they're not permitted, they're special exception uses.
Peter, do you need one?
The package really is very draft at this point, so it's not really, I mean, I'll
wait until you have.
after tonight, hopefully we'll have a final draft after
Yeah,
tonight.
I'll take it once you have a final draft.
Okay.
No point in doing it.
Sorry.
So when you go through the regulation that you have in front of you there, you'll find that it addresses several changes or minor changes in the use table. It gets into parking standards. It gets into site development in some of the parameters related to turnarounds and on sites. There's a big section on landscaping. We got into the buffer requirements, looking at changing buffer requirements. We did not change them in the commercial zones. In the industrial zones, there's a 75-foot buffer with ability to go to 50 feet if you design it with certain design parameters. So we did put in some, and Kevin, I'd be curious your comments on the buffer requirements, whether they're buffer requirements, we should be looking at the 5-year height. So there's some actually cross sections that we added for people to look at. I don't know, Bart, what else did we do in general?
Nothing's coming to mind
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. So again, under the warehouse section, so we added that it'd be by special exception if it's a warehouse or distribution facility. And we added some criteria in that section so that supporting documentation comes in at the time of an application, a truck routing plan, some other things that we would not have required previously are now being required, some more details about the operation of the business. Again, some of those things, especially if they're special exception, they can be made as part of approval conditions. That's some of the thought behind adding those requirements. We added more information related to traffic requirements, what needed to be submitted at the time of a traffic study, just some more details that we felt would be useful in evaluating the projects.
You covered all the definitions, right?
Yeah, the definitions were the primary thing we started with, so, yeah.
Michelle, how did the subcommittee come up with 40,000 square foot for a warehouse?
I think we were just thinking of sizes of ones that we know out there and what the a typical size might be. I think one of the, we did a lot of research. I brought a lot of articles to the commission or to the committee that I found, and you know, Massachusetts did quite a bit of work on warehouses and things like that. And I think what I realized through this is warehousing's not going away, so we need to provide for it. It's just how do we provide for it with being more sensitive to how it's operating. So I think the recognition was that we don't want to, you know, not allow for it. We just want to make sure that we're paying attention to how we're allowing it. Anything?
Okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Again, go ahead, Steve.
All right, I'm now looking at section 211, that package. Section 211C talks about the display is limited to 20% of the front yard setback. Does that mean that they can put the display in the front yard setback?
Yes, that's what that would be saying, which is what we've allowed on Route 5, for example, a couple places.
Okay. In 216, it mentions, and I think maybe a couple other places, it mentions blocking the visibility of things like dumpsters, air conditioning units. There's been a recent change in the state law that's going to make it much more desirable for these large warehouses to put solar on their rooftop. So I'm thinking wherever we're talking about screening air conditioning units, we also ought to screen solar. So I would suggest adding that word wherever you're talking about screening. I did send you some things which I think were more typographical,
Okay, sure.
but I won't
Yeah.
go over.
Yeah. Just so everybody knows, at this point, we're in the throes of making the final draft. There's one section on walls that I wanted to add to the exhibits, but the hope would be to have a final draft prepared and ready, put back up on our website by first part of next week and sent off to CROG by the end of next week. So that is our timetable. We're doing some final edits on the chart that goes along with this as well to clean up our numbering.
Yeah, and just for the record, Steve did send me a email, and I believe he included
With
you
some
and
edits on
Caitlin.
it.
If you could, I'd like to make that part of the record because I'm going to go on my phone right now
Okay.
and review it, so I don't want to, anything subject to freedom of information, so I'd just like that included in the record.
On page 3, where it talks about earth product screening, rock crushing, topsoil, I'm thinking maybe that ought to mention the noise ordinances there. What?
3.
Page 3, where it talks about screening and of rocks and crushing rocks and things like that. On page 7, in the middle of the page, there's an abbreviation, ADT.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 7, item C.
Where it says projected traffic volumes, ADT.
Just wondering what that is, like,
Average daily traffic, ADT?
yeah,
Average daily traffic, but yeah.
okay.
Yep.
Maybe spell that out for,
Just on that section there, that's a highlighted yellow section, Bart, that was something I added based on our last subcommittee meeting, so I'd look for your input on that. And that's related to putting something in place so that in the event we run into an ongoing issue on our public roadways of traffic queuing post-approval, that we have a way to go back to the developer or the owner and look for modifications to address it. So that's what that
on
relates
page 8, paragraph 454 at the bottom.
If we could, Steve, just on page 7, that one, Michelle, we had talked about possibly having a paragraph, and maybe you put it someplace else, but making the owner or applicant responsible for traffic direction if need be. If they're clogging up the road, it's not just the plan, but
Okay, okay.
we had a part B to that also.
Yeah, I gotta check and make sure we can do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you. Go ahead, Steve, I'm sorry.
On page 8 at the very bottom, section 454. It says outside storage shall be limited to materials and equipment used in on-site manufacturing. But if we look at warehouses, like the Home Depot warehouse, we allowed storage of their products that are going through the distribution center. So we need to make sure we aren't, I mean, I thought that was okay, so I don't want to outlaw what we did with Home Depot.
See, but okay.
This is,
This is the I-291 section here that you're looking at, right?
It's the industrial zone.
Oh, I'm sorry, it's the industrial zone. So it would be in the I-291 zone where we changed it and allowed it by special exception. So you don't want that anymore, is that what you're saying? So in other words, we had the I-291 zone when we said you couldn't have outdoor storage. Then we made a regulation that allowed it, and that's why Home Depot has it. So
Okay.
it's really addressed in the I-291 regulation, the Home Depot is, not this section.
But it seems to me anybody who does a warehouse might be wanting to have outside storage if they're willing to go through the screening that we required of Home Depot. I don't know what other people think, but
So you want to allow that, or you don't
yeah,
want to?
I would like to
Okay.
allow outside
Okay.
storage if it's properly screened.
So maybe we want this to mirror more what we have in the I-291 section, is what you're thinking. Okay, I'll
That's
take a
what-
look at it.
Yeah. Page 9, performance standards. Is there some way to make sure that this includes the operation of diesel or trucks on site? I mean, the noise ordinances and other ordinances do not, they exempt trucks that are moving until they until they turn their engine off, they're exempt. So is there some way to incorporate truck noise and pollution inside the on-site of these places? I don't know the answer to that question. Let's see. Oh, yeah, in that same section, item C, air pollution. You talk about sections, various sections, but it doesn't say of the Connecticut statutes.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then 468 talks about during nighttime hours. Do we want to be more specific? What we mean by nighttime hours? Otherwise, why would you have lights except during night, right?
So that, in my thinking, it would be something as part of your special exception approval, you might limit the hours depending on the operations of a business. I mean, a business might close at 8 and then you want them off by 10, or it might close at 11 and you want them off. I mean, to me, that might be something you would do through your special exception.
Yep.
And if later in the regulations, one of the things developers asked is what are the hours of operation? So you do have them coming in as part of your application.
Okay.
While you're on page 9, could I just ask a question? On Part A, under 4.5.7, the environmental impact, and maybe this is the lawyer in me just taking over my brain. No use shall be allowed that is noxious or offensive. Do we define what offensive is? So if somebody just doesn't like smoke or something like that, they could say that's offensive to me?
By reasons of smoke, particulate matter, noise, dust, of all those things, potentially, yes, they could say that.
Okay, I just,
And it goes on to say you have to submit a written assessment of how you're addressing those, so. If someone were to claim that, then that would be your recourse.
And in the table on page 10, the entry for manufacturing deals with one space per employee based on the largest shift plus 20% for shift change. Other places, they just talk about employees. So I'm thinking, you know, allow for the shift change, like in warehouse, which is the second to the last entry, one space per employee, but what do we mean by employee? Is it the largest shift plus 20%? I kind of like that concept.
So you want to add that verbiage to that particular one?
And then up above at distribution facilities, same question.
So just so you know where that came from, I went ahead and, you know, based on data that we'd been given through our application process and looking at other towns' regulations and particularly looking at Windsor's because they have a lot of distribution facilities. This was the regulation, the parking calculation they did. And I took example of several of our distribution facilities to see how it would work on that. And a lot of them were spot on that they were proposing what this got. A lot of them were, we waived parking requirements because they didn't feel they needed as many. So I found this to be as close to a parking calculation as I could based on data out there. You can certainly require more, but that's where it came from.
Okay, I would refer that back to the committee, you know, just because I made the comment doesn't mean it has to be there. Okay.
But I just want you to know that's where it came from.
And then I did this mental exercise before. There are parking spaces for trucks. Do they count in the parking count?
No, I think there's another part of the regulation that says that you have to provide a certain amount of truck parking per square footage that wouldn't be your, you know, your parking count. It would be separate to that.
So maybe somehow that ought to be
Clarify
clear
that.
throughout,
Okay.
yeah. Page 12, item I, perimeter circulation road. It seems to me that an issue could arise as to whether a site has one parking lot or 3 parking lots, and that would change the interpretation of this rule. So I would like this to somehow reflect the total parking spaces of the site. So if they have more than 200 total parking spaces, I don't care how many parking lots they have, just bleed that concept in there. And I didn't understand the bit about parking on the perimeter road.
Right now, parking on the perimeter road is not allowed, but what we were willing to do is if they needed additional parking for employees, then there could be, I think, a certain amount of employee parking that's shown possibly as reserved spaces on the plan.
Okay, I'm happy with it, yeah. On page 18, section 724, I'm thinking the title ought to work into the title, something about bus terminals, since you talk about them in the lead paragraph. Yeah. And then on page 19, do buses include school buses? You know, do we want to Are they, I mean, we have a school bus site right now in town on Nutmeg Road. So this would apply to, well, they're already existing, but in principle would apply to them.
Correct. So if it didn't meet the separating distance, then it would be a non-conforming bus terminal. If you adopted a distance it didn't meet. That's what I'm not sure I understand your question, but if that's what your question is. So it would apply, so yes.
A couple places you mentioned actual commercial facilities with the name of the facility, like Amazon or Datco. I guess I'm just wondering if that's okay, or
I think it was just a such as.
They're examples.
yeah, but in the
examples.
regulations to have, you know, 10 years from now, it might be somebody else, you know.
It might.
I think we're trying to be as descriptive as possible so that it's
Yeah,
clear.
I mean, it's
so
helpful, I agree. I'm just wondering if that should be a
10
good
years from
idea.
now, I'll put it on someone's to-do list to check it.
On page 20, second paragraph, the word onerous, apply the most onerous requirements, stringent, maybe, or?
Stringent, yeah, that's better.
I scribbled in a comment on the last page, page 21, needs
Adequate
adequate
parking.
parking for anticipated auto and truck access for these self-storage facilities. I mean, people do bring moving vans into these facilities that may be only there for a couple hours, but,
Sure, yeah.
you know, just that they can accommodate them somehow. Maybe parking isn't even the right word, just
Loading area maybe. or
ability,
something.
ability to accommodate those kind of vehicles. Section 6.2, which is a different stapled section. On the first page, item H, talks about monitoring for trash. I'm thinking also maintain it clean of trash, or some words to that effect.
You're getting into the landscaping now,
Landscaping, yeah,
right?
right.
Okay. Landscaping and buffers.
I'm sorry. I missed what you said, Steve. I was trying to find my.
Okay. Section, item H, landscape strips are left in a natural state shall be monitored for trash and maintained clean or something, words to that effect.
Not just monitored, huh?
Yeah, we got a nice pile of trash.
I get it.
Yeah, he's talking about the yellow right now, I believe.
That was a new addition, the yellow.
Yeah. And then on the next page, under B, at the very bottom of the page, it talks about in areas where there are significant grade changes between uses being buffered, the buffer design may propose an alternative buffer to, and I struck out the rest and suggest in a location to meet the intent of this and performance standards of this section. In other words, I think this is dealing with all kinds of strange hills and things like that that make it hard to design a buffer.
Yeah, I think we recognize that, you know, if you have a 50-foot buffer in a commercial area, what you're buffering may be way up at the top of the hill there, and it may do better to put, you know, a screening element along a parking area rather than along the property line. So this gives you some flexibility of having a more meaningful buffer.
And again, I'm on the next page after that, section D. You refer to section 6.4. Did you really mean, I don't know, what did you mean? 6.4 is a whole big thing about parking, right? Did you mean 6.4 or something more specific?
I'm not sure where you are, Steve. I
Okay, I'm
apologize.
in item D, buffer plantings,
Yeah.
at the bottom of.
Oh, 6.2. Sorry. 6.2. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'll fix that reference.
Michelle, back on F, let me see, page number, no page number on this. Might be page 4, but for berms, 2A. The second sentence says, "No berm shall exceed 8 feet in height, not including associated landscaping or fencing." And I don't know if that's the right wording, because if they propose a berm that's higher than 8 feet, I don't necessarily have a problem with it.
So maybe we just want to strike that whole sentence then.
What's that?
We want to strike that whole sentence, and if you don't care how high they go, then we don't want to limit it.
Right,
Okay, so we'll just, don't put anything there.
thank you.
On section 6, I think it's 625, which is probably the 5th page.
625?
It says
It's the screening
Oh,
requirements.
yeah, okay.
So-
down to B2B. I'm just suggesting we add solar
Yeah.
there.
So Steve, screening of solar, the only question I have for you, I mean, is there any concern for shading panels? I mean, isn't that something that, no?
No, I mean, we typically require, what's the word for a higher wall than the roof?
Parapet or something like that.
Parapet, yeah, I mean, there's no issue there. Yeah, it's pretty neat now. They can put as much solar as the roof will hold, and then they get to sell all that electricity to the utility. It used to be that you could only put the solar up there that matched your use. So if you think of a warehouse with a bunch of electric lights and maybe they're charging a forklift, they don't have much demand for solar as of last year. This year, now they can fill the whole roof, and we really ought to be encouraging that. Okay. On that paragraph C of the same place, what happens if they replace the equipment at a later date? Just, you might want to think about the work.
Basically, what happens is that when it comes in for a building permit, I get notified from a zoning compliance, and if I know that there are new rooftop units going up, I look for some screening elements, so.
Okay, so we don't need any other words.
Assuming they take out building permits, I should have some notes.
All right. It's odd that this next comment is under noise control. So on the last page, 1191B, number 1, talks about noise control, but locate plantings close to the noise source while providing an appropriate setback for pedestrian access. I would add sidewalks and snow removal. And then the very last line on that page, it talks about buffers should be greater than 1,000 feet from the crop to be most effective. Is that true? I mean, is that? Yeah, I mean, I don't know, maybe.
I'll check the source and make sure it's correct.
And that's got to do with crop pollinator habitat.
Yeah. Yep.
So one of the things I also gave you is some cross-sections that we had our landscape architect work on. One of the comments I was given by staff looking at it was they said the sizes that are proposed are a significant change from what we had previously. So I didn't know if anybody wanted to weigh in on that, if they thought that was too much of a change, if we should, the size at planting is what I'm referring to.
Yep.
I guess one way could be that would be the size before a bond release, because we're talking about holding a bond for a longer period of time in a buffer area, 5 years as opposed to, a typical season of planting, going down to a maintenance bond for a buffer. So maybe the size of plantings at that time, just something I want you to take a look at and give me some feedback on, because I don't want to.
Are the sizes proposed available, readily available?
That was what Jeff Folger did some querying, and he couldn't find some of them readily available. So that's why I said, well, I'll bring it up, and maybe you know, again, we're just using Google. You have some better resources, Kevin. You maybe, why don't you take a look at that and let me know if you think, because the idea was, we had some cross-sections of what our current buffer requirements look at, you know, with the size of plantings currently, and then we had some of a larger planting size. And the committee recommended the larger planting size, so that's what you're seeing in the packet in front of you tonight. The idea with these cross-sections would is we'd actually incorporate them into the regulations as examples or samples for someone to look at. And I am working one on a wall, because we had some nice walls built in town, and I have some diagrams of walls as well as screening of rooftop units that I want to just put onto a page as, again, an exhibit or a sample for people. So that's one other page that would be added to this text that you have.
Can I go back to that last sentence, the one with the less than or greater than sign? How is a builder going to implement that? In other words, I'm wondering how they actually can worry about that. There is crop or not in the neighboring property. You can't move the buffer to, I'm thinking that, why do we have that paragraph?
Well, you know, maybe it's misplaced. Basically, it's not really part of the buffer design necessarily. It's just a design of a landscaping treatment of a crop pollinator garden, which we're encouraging. In the regulation, we encourage them. So this is kind of a description of what they would be like, right? So maybe because of where it's located, it's not really in the right location.
Or we could say that pollinator habitat is especially important for buffers
Or we could say
within 1,000 feet.
landscaping, rather than saying buffers, we could say landscaping plans should
Yeah.
include, rather than buffers. And take it out of the buffer arena. That might be better. Yeah.
And it was I believe, suggestion, because it says ideally buffers should be greater than 1,000 feet from crop to be most effective. And that, I believe, we did get off of
You know, it was out of
other
it was a buffer design. It was
regulations.
a buffer design book that I had that we used. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
But I'll just verify that. But I think if we just call it a landscaping plan and they can design them in, not necessarily in the buffer, regulated buffer area.
I'll contact Jeff as far as availability.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't want to, you know, I want to put something that we think is going to be workable in there, so.
But then we are going to increase the, the warranty maintenance period.
Yeah, so how we wrote it in the regulation, how it's drafted, is a buffer would be similar to what we do with a maintenance bond. You'd have a buffer established, a bond established, and then at the time that it was planted, it would go into a maintenance, so up to 10% of it would be held for up to 5 years. So it'd be, because we have a 5-year cutout, you know, we say planting, it's got to be a certain size at 5 years and whatnot, so it's designed to be a 5-year with a 10% maintenance going at the 5-year.
Michelle, when we were talking in committee, we had mentioned that we would put a couple of these in as examples. Did you include all these just as, to share with the
Yeah, to share with the
commissioners?
committee, I think we would narrow it down probably, I'm not gonna have pages of them, I'd like to get a couple on a page, so we could, you know, maybe give four or five different illustrations. Some of them, you know, again, if we're changing, we're keeping it the same in our commercial zones, the 50 feet. In the industrial zone, we have the 75 feet or the 50 feet, so I'd like to have a sample of each in there, but we'll nail down the ones specifically. I didn't want to have them prepared until I really knew which ones we wanted, for sure.
Yep. Okay, and there was a lot of work put into these by the landscape architect. And if I could just point out to the rest of the commissioners, drawing number 6, which is the one, the aerial view of what it would look like when it's originally planted, what it looks like filling out wise for the 5-year, and then mature, how it fills up the buffer. And, you know, in a perfect world, that's how it's gonna look, but, you know, trees don't grow if you don't water them, you know? So, yeah. Okay.
I think we put something in there about irrigation.
Just too often that, you know, these guys, again, we get shown these beautiful videos of places look like Disneyland and they're gorgeous. As soon as they get done building them, they don't look like that anymore. And that's within 1 to 2 years, everything goes to hell, trees are dead. So we gotta keep their feet to the fire and make them, you know, own up to what they tell the community they're gonna get, so.
Okay. Anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? Okay, then we'll move on.
So I will take comments that I had tonight and work towards getting a final draft.
Do we still have, do we have another meeting planned before?
I was going to ask you if you wanted to have one last meeting next week, we could do that, so maybe we'll coordinate
For the
one.
committee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have one thing out, Caitlin, we have to hand out. We basically came up with a combined public hearing schedule for you. So you guys will know what you're doing for the next 2 months. So this takes into both the housing and the warehouse moratorium public hearing dates, so.
Thank you. Now, this has our public hearings. I don't see the moratorium extensions in here.
So the moratorium extension, we haven't scheduled a public hearing, we probably do that at the second public hearing that we do. So I'm going to take the public hearing with whatever we're here.
Okay.
So we did the 28th and 2000 meeting to do it. If you want me, I haven't done the same thing for the warehouse because we can really amend them if you want.
Yes, if we're not complete with any of our moratoriums, we need to, in a timely. Correct. Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any questions? So warehouse is in blue, residential is in red. And it's really informational. I know. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So these are going to be important dates once we start getting into our future months, and I hope we won't have any problem getting a quorum at these meetings. If I was actually thinking about doing an April vacation, but I'm going to try and plan it around these dates. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but that's just how I roll, you know. Okay. Well, again, Michelle, thank you for all your hard work on that, and keeping everything on track and time-wise. And I know Michelle's done a lot of research into other town regulations and talking with other town planners, and she really did a hell of a job. Appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, I believe that.
Ed, I thought the warehouse committee did a bang-up job of really exploring all the issues in that area.
Thank you. We do have bonds. Does everybody have their sheet? Commissioner Cavagnero, are you waiting? Oh, okay.
I'll get the bonds as usual.
Okay.
We have inland wetlands bonds. I'm going to read them off separately. 16-50P, Hartford Truck Equipment, ENS. Amount 2,000, reduction 2,000, and a balance of 0. And then we have 22-02P, Hartford Truck Berm, ENS, amount $20,000, reduction $20,000, with a balance of 0.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I don't know if anybody had a chance to go out to that back road behind and check it out. I'm just curious about your thoughts. Yeah,
Yeah, I like it. Looks great.
okay, I went out and I liked it too. But, you know, fences only last so long and, yeah. I only saw it from the backside. I didn't go on the property, but. Yeah, awesome. Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Michelle, do we have old business?
No, we do not.
Okay. Pardon me? Oh, yeah, Steve's suggesting I remind people about the special meeting next week, the 31st, which will start at 6:30, I believe?
It's be 6:30 and it's gonna be in the Madden Room.
Okay.
Yep.
And that will be an executive session. So,
Correct, so there's no other business on at all.
okay, awesome. Okay, is there anything else to discuss? If not, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
I make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Okay, we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody.